The far-right riots that have swept the UK are rightly and understandably deeply concerning to British Muslims. But when one of the most high-profile Muslim MPs entered the Good Morning Britain studio this morning, her concerns weren't taken seriously.
Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper and Rishi Sunak over the weekend have all said that...
have they called it Islamophobic and racist?
Why is that language important?
These aren't trivial
They've called it
matters.
racist. Have they called it racist?
These are not trivial matters. We have to...
No, I know. No, I'm so sorry. We do have to ask you questions
Absolutely,
as well.
absolutely.
So
and if you want to, you can
why
answer
is
them.
that...
It's your call.
I'm going to wait for Kate to finish her question if that's...
If you want to answer the questions, you can, but you don't have to.
So why is it important to you to use that specific word, Islamophobic? It's been called racist, it's been called thuggery. I think that's important because we are speaking to the Home Secretary and other politicians this morning. Why does that matter to you to use the word Islamophobic?
In Stockport, a mosque was targeted, bricks were thrown out. The people who were in the mosque at that time, who were basically locked down in that mosque, said that they feared for their life.
But
they
Keir
weren't able to
Starmer has
get out.
condemned that.
I'm just finishing the question.
I did ask specifically about the word,
if that's
sorry,
okay.
yeah.
I would also say that the role of...
I was interrupting you. He sort of says at the end, oh, no, I was interrupting you. That's what I was doing. That's fine. That's my job. What? That was, as I said, right, this is a situation which is incredibly, incredibly worrying for especially Muslim people, all people of colour in the country, but especially Muslim people, because it's mosques that are being attacked, right? And it's sort of really Islamophobic rioters who are taken to the streets. And he can't let her finish an answer. He's not even just interrupting Zara Sultana. He's interrupting his own co-host, right? His co-host can't finish a question to Zara Sultana because he keeps butting in. Like, it's really, really bizarre, really, really disrespectful. And you'll also notice that when Ed Balls was repeatedly interrupting Zara Sultana and his own co-host, he was doing so to defend the government, right? He was saying, no, but Keir Starmer has said this, Keir Starmer has said that, saying, well, I think the government's doing okay, actually. Now, you might say he has a bit of a conflict of interest there because, if you didn't know already, his wife is the Home Secretary. Right? Ed Balls' wife is the Home Secretary. Clearly, though, ITV don't care about conflicts of interest because this happened later on Good Morning Britain.
There have been identifiable individuals on social media who have been inciting not just riot, but violence. They've been using racist language. They've been using falsehoods about what happened in Southport. This is happening on the social media platforms. What can be done, what should be done now by the social media companies and the police and the government to stop this happening? Because it's been happening for a week.
Well, you're right, Ed, that we have seen these what things that are appearing online that are clearly criminal.
You're right, Ed. Yeah, you're right, Ed. I agree with that. You literally had breakfast together. Ash, I want your comments on this. You've got Zara Sultana, who goes into the studio. I think Ed Balls was really, really disrespectful there. And then he's defending the government. His wife is a part of it. And then he gives his wife a really soft interview. Like, what? How has this been allowed to happen?
You know what? It's just laughable, isn't it? It's just laughable. It's such an open display of a corrupt and dysfunctional media that a former Labour minister who's married to a current Labour minister can sit there and harangue a Labour MP who's in a sort of, is a political opponent, an internal political opponent of his wife, can talk over her, can sneer at her, can treat her really disrespectfully, even though she's on to talk about racism and she's the only person of colour in the studio at the time. And then he can go, and now over to my wife, who I'm going to interview, and we're going to do this thing where we pretend not to know each other. A functioning media would not allow this to happen. And in a way, I'm not even angry at Ed Balls, all right? He's only able to behave in this way because the system of media has enabled him to do so. I'm angry with ITV. I'm angry with Good Morning Britain because they had a look at what in any other context you would see as a flagrant conflict of interest, and they went, yeah, good TV, that's fine.
Let's go back to the debate between Zara Sultana and Ed Balls. I think Ash and I might have some disagreements on the next one.
I would also say that the role of the Labour Party historically through New Labour, the controls on immigration, mugs, and also your article in The Guardian where you said the problem with Labour is that they have accepted too many Eastern European migrants. We have to look at all of this historically over at least 2-3 decades when we look at the role.
I was totally right in that article.
So the discussion around immigration, you don't see that playing a role in what we're seeing descend across the country. You don't think there's any complicity in that at all?
I think if you fail to control and manage immigration properly, then things go wrong.
So the language that protesters...
So you have to control and manage immigration?
Rather than far-right mobs and
you believe in controlling and managing
the language that they're using are stop the boats. They are telling people like me to go home. If we look at the language used by politicians and the language used by these people in these streets, you will see a direct correlation.
But you've moved from attacking Andrew to attacking me. So let me have a go.
Kate asked me about language, if that's okay.
What you can't do is just spray out attacks on all of us and then not have any comeback. You didn't answer Andrew's question.
No, she didn't.
You attacked me. I wrote an article in which I said it was important to control and manage migration. You agree with that?
What I'm saying is, when we're talking about migration...
I'm asking you a question. You've got to answer it.
I am answering it.
Do you agree in controlling and managing migration?
I think we need to talk about migration in a way that humanises people who have to migrate.
Of course.
And the levels of the debate, the levels it has stooped, has meant that people are setting fire to hotels that are housing asylum seekers.
But do you agree in controlling and managing it?
When we look at the impact of language used, we need to look at how it affects people in our communities and in our streets. In Tamworth, a hotel housing asylum seekers has been set alight. That has happened also in the north. And I think we need to really be careful about the language we use. And just going back to Kate's question,
I'm asking a really simple question. Do you think it's important for governments to control and manage migration?
I think having an immigration policy which is fair, which recognises that we need migration to staff our NHS, to staff our social care crisis with an ageing population, I think we need to have really responsible language. And just answering Kate's question...
I don't know.
Can I answer Kate's?
Now, I have mixed feelings about this. I think, first of all, it's worth saying the way Zara was treated in that interview was really gross. I think when you're in the midst of a situation where you've got anti-Muslim riots across the country, just having 3 white men sort of snigger as a young Muslim MP sort of speaks very passionately, I think is completely inappropriate, really, really gross. I think the way she was treated was awful. I also do think, though, that there is a danger of the left sort of saying, we've got these far-right riots. Anyone who's ever argued that immigration should be lower than it currently is therefore implicated. This was the article, by the way, she was referring to, Ed Balls. We were wrong to allow so many Eastern Europeans into Britain. It's essential there is a debate on what restrictions on unskilled labour mobility are needed in enlarging Europe. In that article, he did sort of say, migration has been very important for the NHS. It has been important for cultural diversity. It's also created some problems. And I mean, the argument was that Labour should have had the same provisional controls that sort of Germany had when it came to EU expansion. Ash, I want your opinions on this. I tweeted something to this effect today, and it's sort of divided opinion, let's say, because I do think there is a danger of the left saying these far-right rioters are terrible, which obviously they are, and also anyone who has ever said that migration should be lower is therefore implicated. And the danger, I think, with that is that you are then lumping in a huge proportion of the population with the far right. And I think you want to isolate the far right, not say, oh, the far right are terrible, and by the way, all of you are guilty too. What's your response?
Well, I think that there's a difference between comms and strategic comms and what the truth is. Strategically, it is probably more useful to isolate the far right, create the sense of a much bigger we and an us, which, isolates them and says that you're not representative of the entire country. You're not representative of the political mainstream at all. However, what the truth is that there are these threads of connection, both in terms of organizations and networks and think tanks and journalists, and also discourses and ideas and narratives that exist between the mainstream and the far right on the issue of immigration, and immigration as a vehicle for racist ideas and racist ideology. And I'm afraid to say that New Labour was deeply implicated in this. David Blunkett, as Home Secretary, collaborated with the Sun newspaper to drive what was called an Asylum Week, which was a week of planned out attack pieces on the front page of the newspaper, demonizing asylum seekers, making it out to be this huge uncontrolled problem. Also, at the end of the week, David Blunkett could swoop in with a planned op-ed promising another crackdown. Now, Did that at the time weaken the far right? Did that mean that they had the wind taken out of their sails because it was an issue being owned and claimed by the mainstream? No. What followed was the BNP having their most successful local election showing ever. And if you listened to what BNP activists were saying at the time, they said, well, actually, Labour gave us a gift because we were going around knocking on doors with the mainstream issue at the time. And the reason why I also know this is because I recently wrote a chapter on this. This is why I've not been around very much, because I was finishing my book. During that period, in the early 2000s, you saw in cities like Peterborough, which had become the focal point of tabloid attention, always the setting of these asylum scare stories. You had politicians weighing in saying how terrible it all was. What followed was you had acts of racist violence being carried out against asylum seekers and those who were perceived as asylum seekers. So Michael, I can definitely see the argument that strategically the thing that you want to do in this moment is isolate the far right. But I do think that the truth is that there has been a nurturing of the far right, not deliberately. I think that Labour politicians would have thought they were weakening the far right by trying to claim some anti-immigration turf, but ultimately it helped bolster their credibility in talking about immigration, because they're saying, okay, well, everyone agrees this is a problem. Those guys in power aren't doing anything about it. Everyone thinks immigration should be lower. But they're in the government. They're not doing anything about it. So, we should have some pogroms. We should say, mass repatriation, mass deportations, along the lines of race and ethnicity. And so I think the way in which you have a better conversation about immigration is that you have a conversation about immigration which is rooted in an economic context, which is rooted in the weakening of collective bargaining and organized labor in this country. Because if what you wanted to do is say, okay, it's really unacceptable that you've got these low paid migrants, and in certain sectors, that means that you've got the normalization of low wages for everybody. You could say, all right, well, what we're going to do is introduce sectoral bargaining. We're going to introduce fair pay agreements, which don't just, cover individual workplaces, which is what trade unions are allowed to do now. It can extend to the entirety of agriculture, of hospitality, of the care sector. What if we do that rather than demonizing people who've come here to work for these sectors and organizations and contribute to society? What if we did that? You offer people a real choice about how to address these issues of low wage precarious work, rather than just going, oh, why don't we grab that that dial that has migration on it and turn it down? You never actually turn the migration down, by the way. You just turn the hatred against migrants up.